Good morning, ladies and gents. Glad you all are here this morning on a beautiful Taos morning, right, Bill? How much longer do you get to be here?
Till the 18th.
Till the 18th. Good. Welcome, everybody. Those of you online, glad to have you as we start two new series today. I don't know why. For 30 plus years, I've been pastoring and always have different series. And they always all end at the same time. And so I have to start new ones at the same time. And here, I'm starting two new ones today. We're going to start here with Ezra-Nehemiah and a little series called Back to Jerusalem. And then in the worship service, we're going to do another 30 Things series. I haven't done a 30 Things series in a while. We got 30 prophets of the Bible we're going to pick up in the worship time. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Today we're going to go back to Jerusalem, do Ezra and Nehemiah together. That'll be our Bible study time for the next little while. I don't know how little or how while. But we'll go through pretty thoroughly through Ezra and Nehemiah. These are two books that I have not preached through or taught through in the past. And that's what I'm trying to do now is pick up books that I've never done. And so here they are. Obviously, I've given a sermon here or a quote there, but never all the way through to see what these two books are about in a thorough, biblical, rightly divided way. And so we're going to rebuild faith, worship, and society in Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, when you open up your Bible, there you go. When you open up your Bible to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they follow one after the other, right after 2 Chronicles. And then you got Ezra and Nehemiah, followed by Esther. And there are a couple other books that actually go, if we were to take books by segment and brought them together, we would have, let's say, historical segment. If we had a chronological Bible, we got Ezra, we got Nehemiah, we got Esther. What other books would fit in that time category? Does anyone want to see if they can pass the pre-test here? After Chronicles ends with the destruction of Jerusalem. Ezra and Nehemiah picks up 70 years later on the return. So we're looking at books that have to do with the return of the exiles. Those books would be Ezra, Nehemiah. Esther is during that time. And then there's some prophets. Ooh. Yeah. You flunked. Yes. You're waiting. Yes. We would have, let's see, Haggai is one of them. Haggai encourages the rebuilding of the temple, which we will see in Ezra and Nehemiah. So Haggai fits right within there. Malachi is another one. Malachi closes out. It kind of gives the spiritual condition during part of that time of Ezra and Nehemiah before they have their great revival especially. And so Malachi fits in there. And then there's one other one. And I forgot which one it is, but I'm waiting for you all. I don't think it's Zephaniah, but but it was a good guess. One of the prophets. Now, if you were to actually take them chronologically, I think you would do, and this is what we're going to talk about today, but it's an introductory session to Ezra and Nehemiah. I think you would take Esther first, even though it comes after Ezra and Nehemiah, then Esther. There's some debate about where Esther fits in. Some people put it between Ezra and Nehemiah. Some people put it right in the middle of the book of Ezra. And I'm going to put it prior to. I perhaps should do Esther, but we've done Esther before, so I'm not going to do Esther right now. But I think you've got the destruction of Jerusalem, and then you've got Esther in between before they go back to Jerusalem. And then you've got Ezra, Nehemiah, and those prophets are all going to fit within Ezra and Nehemiah during that time frame. Now, what we're going to talk about today is how Ezra and Nehemiah fit together chronologically so that we can study the books chronologically rather than canonically. By the way, when I say canonically versus chronology, I mean the canon is the way we find them in our table of contents. But as you know, the way we find something in our table of contents does not necessarily mean this came before that, because you know that the books of the prophets are all set aside canonically, but they really flip over and fit on top of the historical books and embed within there. So we've arranged things kind of thematically rather than chronologically. You know that because every now and then you've seen a chronological Bible. They're kind of interesting. There's one I used to recommend called Reese, like Reese's, like the candy, Reese's Chronological Bible, which is very good, but it's gone out of print. And I don't know a publisher to try to get it back into print, you know. But one of the challenges, and this goes with this lesson too, one of the challenges with a chronological Bible is somebody is deciding which came first. It is some degree of interpretation that by necessity goes in there. Did they get their interpretation right, or did they not? We know that this is true when we try to put the Gospels together in which came first, and often it's called a harmony of the Gospels. What we're going to try to do is a harmony of Nehemiah, Esther. So Ezra, Nehemiah, excuse me, I'll get it right. Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, if you are reading in the Masoretic text, anyone want to try the quiz number 2? What is the Masoretic text? Babylon. It's you said Torah, I heard. You said Babylon. It's a little bit of both. It is the text that the Jewish people put together of their scriptures. Now, we translate based upon the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were the ones who did this. We translate based upon the Masoretic text. However, we canonize according more to Greek texts. Now, if you were to look in a Masoretic text, which typically would be a scroll, of course, the Ezra-Nehemiah is actually one scroll. It's not 2 scrolls, it's one scroll. One book that seamlessly goes together is not considered 2. Now, if you bought a modern-day Jewish Bible called a Tanakh, it probably is going to have them separated, because later on the Jewish people made the same separation that later the Greeks had done, and then Latin, and then it came into our English versions. They got separated over the years, but originally, and still today in the Masoretic text, they would be one. Now, I think that we have to come from their oneness in order to put together the chronology of it all, and let's talk about that a little bit. And the reason I want to spend the time with this, because you might be saying, well, I knew I was in the advanced class, but that was far more advanced than I want. But if I don't have this session by next week, you're going to be confused, because I am going to start the study of Ezra-Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to spend about the first 6 or 7 chapters of Nehemiah as the first segment, and then we're going to switch back to Esther, and then Ezra, and then we're going to do a little back and forth on this, because we're going to try to put them together chronologically. Now, Ezra, the book of Ezra, is about the return from exile. It starts out, as we'll see soon, it starts out with the decree from Cyrus to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem. It is a decree that Daniel the prophet had prophesied. Jeremiah had prophesied that it would be 70 years after exile that this would return. And so they go to rebuild. And Ezra really is about the spiritual reform, the building of the temple, the revival of Judaism that takes place when Ezra comes back. Nehemiah, however, is about the civic restoration. It is about going forth and building the walls. Nehemiah, of course, is famous for rebuilding the walls. As a matter of fact, if you go to Jerusalem today, there are segments of Nehemiah's walls that are still there. They're well within the walls that are there now, the city walls that are there now. Inside of those, you can find the ruins of Nehemiah's walls. But that is more of a civic restoration. So the way these were organized was not chronologically, in my opinion, but rather thematically. Let's take care of the spiritual restoration, then let's write about the civic restoration. But what we're going to see is the civic restoration actually came before the spiritual restoration and even the restoration of the temple. And I'll try to prove that case to you today to say a lot of Nehemiah comes before Ezra, even though canonically you find Ezra first in the Bible. And so a sequential reading, I know it makes sense. And I know I also say if the plain sense makes common sense, seek no other sense. And it makes sense to say, okay, the temple was restored and then he came back and rebuilt the walls. But if you actually read the text, what you see is this doesn't work to read it sequentially like that. So again, the statement is, if the plain sense makes common sense. What I'm going to try to present to you today is the plain sense, you read this before you read that, doesn't make common sense, that has to go before this. Now, that's not unusual. How many of you were old enough to remember going to see Star Wars for the first time? Yeah, okay. Everybody but Luca. And as we learned later, Star Wars was not the first thing that happened. They started in the middle of the story and then they back up, and I guess artistically, thematically, sometimes there's reasons to do that. We see it in the book of Revelation. We see it. A good example is studying 1st and 2nd Kings versus 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They have a lot of the same information in them, but one of them, Chronicles, is coming from a priestly, spiritual point of view, whereas 1st and 2nd Kings is coming from more of a historic, civic point of view. And they don't necessarily put things in the same order nor say the same thing about a particular event because they're looking at it from a different theme. So if you take the Ezra-Nehemiah point of view as one text to put them in, and the author, probably we would call him a compiler, Ezra, we would say, okay, Ezra had some themes he wanted to talk about. Maybe he was most passionate about talking about the spiritual restoration that came to Israel when they came back to Jerusalem. But as he writes about that and compiles that, he comes back and he says, okay, now I need to give Nehemiah's point of view. And Nehemiah had the civic restoration, but he doesn't put that in order. He gives it thematically. And so that's what we're going to do. But I think what happened through the years, what you're going to find, if you go and Google this, you're going to find out I'm wrong. So my job is to convince you I'm right. So that when you Google it, you can say, oh, I see where he's coming from. Now, we're going to let the text show us we're right. But if you Google it, Ezra came first, and later, really, you've got a divide. Though the start of the books is only about 13, 14 years difference, is what you'll find out if you Google it. From the end of Ezra to the beginning of Nehemiah, they'll say there's about a 13-year gap there. But there are certain points within both of those that you get almost a 100-year gap, about 95 years old, 95-year gap that is put in there in the traditional chronology. I think it happened accidentally. I think we divided Ezra and Nehemiah in the Greek world. We divided it because by the time you came to the Greeks, we were putting things in books and not scrolls. Believe it or not, it's easier to have a long scroll than a long book. The bigger the book, the more difficult it is to bind. We know about that, don't we, Luca? And so small book, that's easy. So in binding an ancient book, it was simpler to separate Ezra and Nehemiah. Well, that was all well and good, and just for practical purposes, here's Ezra, here's Nehemiah. Plus, we can charge you twice that way, right? Volume 1 and Volume 2. But inadvertently, what happened is people began to read those as two separate books. They read Ezra. They separated that from Nehemiah. They didn't see these as one that flips over on top of another. They began to build their chronology off of that assumption, and they built the chronology wrong. So I'm going to try to convince you of that today. You see the traditional view there of the separation that takes place of Ezra coming, building the temple, restoring the Torah observance, and Nehemiah coming later with the walls and the infrastructure. And the key thing, we're going to look at some fixed points in a moment, but the key thing here is both of them have a feast in the seventh month. We happen to be in the seventh month, and we have the Jewish high holy holidays, right? They come once a year, right? And there's the seventh month of the Hebrew year feast that takes place. Well, when you got a feast that takes place every year, you can look at it and say, okay, here's the feast of the seventh month. They both talk about it. The feast of the seventh month. Is that the same year or is it a different year? Separate the books, you make it a different year separated by about 80 years. And one happens 80 years later, the next happens. And again, textually today, we're going to try to prove that can't be the way it is. That just doesn't work to put the second one 80 years later. So I think what you've got is it's the seventh month. This is all the same year right there. It is, and that's what we're going to look at. Now, where do I get this? You may not be surprised because you know that I'm a fan of E.W. Bullinger, and Bullinger goes through this. Now, Bullinger, when you read Bullinger's chronology of various things, he always sounds wrong at the beginning if you've gone to seminary. And that is because you've been taught, here's the chronology. And Bullinger always comes and says, no, here's the chronology. As a matter of fact, Bullinger uses completely different dates. I've given you some dates here in that traditional view of 458, 445, 537. That is the traditional dates. Bullinger, if you look it up, we're not going to put a lot of numbers on it. We're just going to go proportionally what comes first rather than when it actually happens because I don't think that'll make a great deal of difference for us. But Bullinger has completely different numbers. I looked at it for a long time and said, I think Bullinger's wrong, Bullinger's wrong, Bullinger's wrong, Bullinger's wrong. And then I studied Bullinger and I found out Bullinger's right. He has some really good evidence for being right. So I have learned when it comes to chronology, Bullinger is smarter than the rest of us. He does his homework. He's got good evidence, good logical, say, scientific reading, and we'll go through it. Now, so Bullinger comes and he says, okay, this is one book. By the way, in the Masoretic text, it's called Sefer Ezra. Sefer Ezra. Sefer is the Hebrew word that means book. Okay, so you've got Sefer Ezra 1. Ezra is the compiler, and it is, in the traditional view, Ezra is very old, if not dead, by the time you finish Nehemiah. It's hard to compile something when you're dead, right? So in the traditional view, Ezra writes his book. 100 years later, Nehemiah writes his book. They're two separate books. The Jewish rabbinical tradition was always that Ezra wrote Ezra-Nehemiah. He wrote Sefer Ezra. And that doesn't mean that that it's all original to him, because he says along the way, hey, let's turn to Nehemiah now, and I want to bring in Nehemiah's records into what I'm writing here. And so it obviously includes a lot that probably originally was written by Nehemiah, and Ezra brings it in to this book and produces a single structured narrative, not two accounts stitched together. They're not snitched, they're stitched. Now, to do that, we have Nehemiah 1 through 6, which we're going to start studying next week, which is the building of the wall that takes place before Ezra 3 through 6, which is the building of the altar and the temple. So we're going to get the wall built, and then we're going to get the temple built. And I think we're going to see today that really, according to the text, is the only thing that makes sense. Build the wall first, build the temple later. And the city's going to be in ruins. They're going to come back and build the wall. People are going to come in and move. That's Ezra 1 through 3, by the way, is people coming in and moving in. And then they're going to build the temple. There's going to be a revival, a restoration of Torah worship, a restoration of Judaism. And things are going to be brought together. And then from Ezra, from Ezra chapter 6 and Nehemiah chapter 6, in the intervening chapters there, or the following chapters there, there's going to be a little bit of back and forth between the two things that happen and bring it about. Now, there's one other thing that has to be done in order to make this chronology work, and it has to do with three... let's call them people. Darius. Who's heard of Darius? Okay. It's in the book of Daniel and Ezra, Nehemiah. You get them. Artaxerxes. Who's heard of Artaxerxes? Ahasuerus. Who's heard of? Yeah, okay. Not as much, but yeah, he's, in fact, I think he's the guy. If you use a King James, check this for me. Esther chapter 1. I think it mentions him, Ahasuerus, is I believe how you say that. Ahasuerus is there. Now, if you're not in a King James, I think it changes it to Xerxes or Artaxerxes. Just the fact that you can get a Bible that says Ahasuerus or Xerxes or Artaxerxes, all for the same story, tells us something is up with these stories here. Even if you read the book of Daniel and you get Cyrus and you get Darius and you try to put these together, you get a little confused saying, well, I thought we had Cyrus, now we got Darius, what's going on here? And the attempt to put all these together in history has been somewhat difficult. I think, by the way, that it would be Persian history. The Persians came after the Babylonians, you got it. So Nebuchadnezzar came, defeated them, but then the Persians, the Medes and the Persians defeated Nebuchadnezzar. So you got the Babylonians, followed by the Medes and the Persians, followed by the Greeks.
There's a Persian Bible.
There is, yes, and some of those Persian Bibles actually they line up more with the Masoretic text than they do the common text today. You're exactly right. Now, I think Persian history has been difficult because you're putting together these ancient kings. You all can't even get the list of presidents right? So you put together something, 2,500 years ago on empires that have come and gone and come and gone and come and gone. It gets rather difficult. Esther chapter 1 says, Ahasuerus? Okay. And I'm pretty sure in the moderns it's Artaxerxes or Xerxes, either one. Xerxes, okay. So here's the point. If you take Darius, Artaxerxes, and Ahasuerus as individual kings, you have to spread more time in there. Now, Bullinger takes a view, and he's got footnotes if you want them, but Bullinger takes a view, those aren't names, those are titles. Darius is Cyrus, same guy, and that it's a title. You can read in the Companion Bible what these titles mean. I think he's got a good argument for it. Ahasuerus and Xerxes, Artaxerxes, these are all various titles that are given. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, you get even like Darius the First, Darius the Second, Darius the Third. It's a title like Pharaoh. Okay, there's more than one Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh Ramses, Pharaoh Necho, Pharaoh. You get these various pharaohs, kings. So these are titles. Now, when you do that, when you take them as titles, really the harmony begins to come together. It begins to fit into history. It begins to work. And so there's a couple of assumptions that are given. Now, let's go to some scriptures here and see what we've got as soon as I get us there. Let's go. Let's start here. How about that? Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3. I don't have my keyboard here, so I'm going to squat down a little bit and make that work. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3. They said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in what? Great affliction and reproach. Now, let me remind you what's going on here. Nehemiah does anybody remember his job? Cupbearer of the king. He's the cupbearer of the king. And his heart turns towards Jerusalem. They've been in captivity a long time, and he gets a report from Jerusalem, and he says, the remnant that are left of the captivity. Now, who's that? That is the very few that were not taken captive. There were some Jews there. As a matter of fact, we won't get into it, but that's where the Samaritans came from. The Samaritans were a group of Jews that didn't get captured, but during the exile, they kind of intermarried other people. They sort of lost some of their Judaism. They integrated their Judaism into some other things, and so they were kind of Jews, kind of not Jews, the Samaritans. Now, here he's not talking about the Samaritans. These are Jews here. They're the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province. That is the province of Judah or in Jerusalem. Now, this remnant, when Nehemiah speaks, this remnant is, again, in great affliction and reproach. And he says the wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. No surprise, they had been defeated by the previous empire, Babylon. And so as Nehemiah starts, things are good or bad? Bad. Okay, that was a simple question. I'm glad you passed. Now, let's jump ahead a chapter and go to chapter 2, verse 3 of Nehemiah. And it says here, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth how? Waste. Okay, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire. The remnant, they are barely hanging on. The city, it is in waste. Here is Nehemiah's picture of it. Let's see, I'm not sure if I meant... Chapter 2, verse 13. Yeah, here's the view. As Nehemiah now has made it to the city himself, he's not getting reports. This is firsthand. He says, I went out by night to the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. And so we've got, again, no surprise. Then in verse 14, I went on to the gate of the foundation and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Okay, here the gate of the fountain and the king's pool. We don't know exactly what this is. We'll dig into it and try to find out when we get to this passage. But it appears, this is kind of the palace, perhaps, the old palace, we would even say the Davidic or Solomonic palace that had been destroyed, or maybe a city fountain here. Here's where you go into some area that once was a beautiful area of the city. And he said, the beast that was under me, I think that's his Subaru, the beast that was under me, there was no place for him to pass. We couldn't get through there. That's the ruins, the destruction when Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem. Again, fairly simple, easy for us to understand and to put together there. So let's also go to, let's first of all do Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 4. And we will continue again, just getting a little bit of this. Nehemiah 7:4. Now the city was large and great, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not builded. Okay, important for us to think about. So he's there, and we have passed a little bit from Nehemiah chapter 2 to Nehemiah chapter 7. Some people have come in, and the city was large and great. As a matter of fact, they've been building the walls. They've gotten things shored up a little bit from chapter 2 when it was all in destruction. And now there's a lot of people there. The city is fortified, large and great, whereas before it was in ruins and waste. Now the city is large and great, but the people are few, and their houses, this is important, their houses were what? Not builded. Okay. They moved in, they made tents. It was a tent city, yes. I studied not too long ago about, what was the name of that? Boulder, Nevada? What's the town near Hoover Dam? Henderson. Well, I don't know if it was called Henderson at first. There was a makeshift city when they built Boulder, what originally was called Boulder Dam, and then was called Hoover Dam, and then was called Boulder Dam, and then was called Hoover Dam, and now it's called Hoover Dam. When they built it, they brought all these workers in, and, they just, you build what you can to make a house. Okay, that's the case here. They had a big government building project, and the houses were not builded. Now, let's take from there, let's go to the book of Haggai, which you remember is at the same time. And Haggai is most interested in the building of the temple. Haggai chapter 1, verse 4 says, Haggai speaking, "Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste?" Okay, I want you to put together, because we're trying to build a chronology here. We've got, in Nehemiah, they've got walls, but they do not have houses, right? In Haggai, he says, you live in sealed houses. Now, that's a word that goes, it does have to do with the ceiling, but it implies you've got it all together. In fact, some of the modern versions say paneled houses. You're already adding a deck on back. Okay, you've been here a while. You got it. You got the drapes up already. Everything's nice in your house. But after a while, you get sort of comfortable, don't you? With hey, I finally got it. I'm done. Now he says, is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed house, and this house lies waste? Does anyone want to guess what this house is? The temple. Very good. You passed the test. So they live in houses, but the temple is still in waste. Okay, now let's go to Ezra chapter 3, verse 6. We're trying to build a case here that Nehemiah comes before Ezra. Ezra 3:6, Ezra is talking about the rebuilding of the temple. He says, "From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid." Okay, we've got an altar here. It is the 7th month. And at this 7th month feast, or 7th month time anyway, they have the foundation of the temple of the Lord not yet laid. Let's take that and go to Ezra chapter 5, verse 16. And we will see here then that then came the same, Luca? Somebody did well. Sheshbazzar. and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And since that time, even until now, hath it been in building, yet it is not finished. Okay, so we got things that are taking place, and they are coming along and moving. Now, let's look at one more passage. Let's go to Nehemiah chapter 7. Let's look at Nehemiah chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. We looked at verse 4, but let's hit verse 1. Now it came to pass, when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors and the porters, and the singers and the Levites were appointed, I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the ruler of the palace, get it up here, charge over Jerusalem. He was a faithful man and feared God above many. I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun be hot, and while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them, and appoint every man against his house. And the city was large and great, the people were few therein, but the houses were not built. Okay, I think what you've got is the case that Nehemiah came, he built the walls, there were no houses. Later, Haggai says, you live in houses, but there is no temple. Ezra gets there, and he actually talks about the building of the temple. It's the only thing he talks about is the building of the temple. And he talks about, the foundation wasn't laid, and then we laid the foundation at the 7th month, and we began to build it, and it took a while, and it comes to the end, and there was this great revival that takes place. Now, when you read it, of course, in our English Bibles, you read the building of the temple first, the building of the walls second. Ezra writes about the temple, Nehemiah writes about the walls. And I think that what you come up with is that they have that the original book, Sefer Ezra, one book together, talked about a spiritual revival and a civic revival, not in order. If you read them together, I think you can put that, because you're not just studying Ezra and then, as we would normally do in a church setting, let's study Ezra, the rebuilding of the temple. And then we might even say, okay, next year, let's study Nehemiah, the rebuilding of the walls. And you would put those as separate events, out of order, because it comes Ezra, Nehemiah. If they're together in one book, you immediately say, well, wait a minute, if you don't have houses, then you're not living in houses. And the pieces go together. So what we're going to try to do in our study of Ezra and Nehemiah is to put this in a chronological order. There will be some places we have to guess a little bit which comes first, But Nehemiah's major work, followed by Ezra's major work, chronologically is what we need to understand. This is how it is going to come together. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think what happened is Ezra, this is my own imagination, so I could be wrong, so I won't charge for it. Ezra, he comes and he says, I am going to write about the rebuilding of the temple and the great revival that took place. I'm excited about this. He writes about it. Then at the end, he says, you know what? It would be good to add an appendix here. Nehemiah's got all this good writing about how they rebuilt the walls. Let's put that in this same thing. And so it followed, but actually comes first. There's Bullinger's point and my point. Now again, I would even challenge you, go do some Bible study by Googling today. It's not the best way to do Bible study, but go do some Bible study by Googling and look at a chronology of Ezra and Nehemiah, or the dates of Ezra, the dates of Nehemiah, whatever it is. When did they rebuild the temple? When did they rebuild the walls? Look at that, and almost always you're going to get things that are anywhere from 15 to 80, 90 years apart from one another. And the rebuilding of the walls are always going to take place later. But I think on the basic level, the chronology just doesn't work if you harmonize it with what the text actually says. So I think what we have to go with is what the text actually says. They lived in houses. Those houses were in a great city surrounded by a wall, but they hadn't gotten around to building the temple. So Haggai comes and says, come on, people, it's time to do it. And Ezra comes in and is the scribe that writes about what happened. So that is why in our study of Ezra and Nehemiah, we are going to start next week with Nehemiah and bring that together and read the book really as a whole. And we're going to let Bullinger kind of guide us out there just a little bit. And so that is an intro to our new Bible study here, Back to Jerusalem. And in just a moment, we're going to take a break, but we will go to 30 Prophets of the Bible, a new series that we are beginning today in our worship service, which will take place after a little bit of break here. Glad everyone's here on a beautiful Sunday morning. And I'll lead us in a closing prayer, and then we'll have a little break as the others gather in. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Bible study today, and we do pray that as we get into these passages in Nehemiah, that it would give us an encouragement about how your promises were fulfilled, and your prophecies even were fulfilled about the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the 70 years of captivity, and how you brought it all together and fulfilled every word. And it gives us encouragement that every word of prophecy yet unfulfilled still is going to be fulfilled, and we'll find encouragement from that. We'll also find encouragement just in the sacred record of this holy history that has taken place, and applications that incidentally may come to us along the way. We look forward to it. Pray that you'd guide the study and help us to get it right from the beginning. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen online. You'll have a new link here in just a moment, and here in about 12 or 13 minutes, we'll start our worship service. Glad you're here. Make yourself at home. Get you a bulletin if you don't already have one. We'll see you soon.